as we jump right in and start talking about the children of Trinidad and Tobago and breeding criminals in schools is what one of the headlines said. Hanif Benjamin of the Center for Human Development is here this morning to discuss this matter with us on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. So good morning to you, Hanif.
Good morning, Ria. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Breeding criminals in our schools.
I have seen it.
Dolly, yeah.
I have seen it.
There was a point that was made with respect to that, breeding criminals. And for want of a better word, he did say, simply because we do have children in our schools who are troubled, who need help. Educators are supposed to be able to recognize these things. Many do, some don't. But then what do you do after you recognize?
Well, while you are being generous in terms of people recognizing, I don't believe that we recognize and or we pay attention to our children.
I did when I used to teach.
And I thank God. My teacher, Carol Tubisett, one of the best teachers I've ever had, she recognized and she cared. And I'm not saying that we don't have people in our system who in fact care and would like to do something. But the fact is, Ria, that a large percentage of our school system is not readily available for our children. And so I will start, and I made notes this morning, Ria, because this thing is real important.
It is.
We are not student focused. We are result focused. Let's just start there. We are result driven. We are data driven. We want press conferences to say that 50% and 20% and 30%. We are not taking time to understand student. And from the time you are not or paying attention to student in a student environment, then what exactly are we doing? We must recognize that our children come to our schools with a myriad of issues, right? Sometimes issues, most times, issues that they have no control over. Issues that requires the adults to deal with. And unfortunately, we don't have the adults dealing with that situation for them. What we look at, Ria, most times are the end results. We look at the bad child. We look at the child who misbehaving. We look at the child who disruptive. We look at the child who smoked the weed. But no one, Ria, is looking at the child before that. No one is assessing the child and saying, listen, the reason why this child is smoking and or selling marijuana in school, probably because his social environment teaches him that or her that. No one is saying when a child comes and is daydreaming, probably because something is amiss, probably because that child has a lot going on. Ria, I want to explain something for you. There's something called psychological safety and physical safety. We always pay emphasis to physical safety, the building safety, this. But let me tell people something. If you are not safe in your mind, you cannot be safe in your space. If you are not safe in your space, you cannot be safe in your mind. So I want you to picture children who are unsafe walking around because of whatever is going on in their mind. What do you think is going to happen? You see, as adults, if we are not safe in our mind, we could still come up with coping mechanisms. But can our children develop those coping mechanisms and execute? You see, a child have to go to school and take 7 subjects and do what they have to do and produce. And no one is saying to that child, what's going on? And so for a long time, Ria, we spend an inordinate amount of time, energy, and resource on less than 10% of our student population. The minister in his statistical analysis indicated that less than 1% of the school is involved in deviant behaviors. That might be correct. But you see, what we look at is either the very bright, and we create programs for the very bright, or for the troublemakers. That is less. So there's a 90% population there that gets nothing.
Isn't that we really do create, okay, the bright ones, yes, their programs, towards that, geared towards that. But do we really, with the troublemakers, have programs geared towards the troublemakers?
Not.
Because they're just basically, oh, you're a troublemaker, and they're left behind.
And that is what I think when I read the article from Mr. Dolly, and I totally agree with what he's saying, and he was trying to be nice. And we are breeding criminals. I have been in a school where criminals were bred and continues to be that. And that is a fact. The thing is, A teacher comes to school with the pressure of having to perform. We know that you were a teacher. There are statistics you need to perform. You have mandates that needs to happen. You don't want 2 or 3 children in your class that is going to keep back your mandate because your professional stance on it, your result, the school is pressuring you. So what happens to those children?
Exactly.
They are pushed to the side. They are either embarrassed away. Remember the last time we spoke on the show, talking about neglect.
Yeah.
So they are in fact neglected. And they are children who require love and attention that are then rejected. Let me tell you something, Ria, if Trinidad and Tobago don't know this. The gangs don't come knocking at your door at home to recruit your children. They are recruited in your schools, in your communities. Because when the children are then rejected, they are left to their own devices in a school. And if we have enough rejected children in one place, what do you think is going to happen? No one is looking at the child who is a little slower than normal. That becomes a problem because now you're keeping back progress. No one looks at a child who has to deal with a lot of environmental pressure, for example, violence in the community, violence in the home, poverty, and other stuff. No one is looking at that. You see? So that child is also rejected. No one is looking at the children who are behaviorally dysregulated because they are troublemakers. No one is trying to understand why this child sleeps when he or she comes to class. No one understands that a child might be hungry and requires a certain level of attention. So Ria, here we go again, just pushing our children aside. So what happens when we push enough of them in one place at the same time? They congregate, and that is where the breeding of the criminals begin. Because if I can't make it in class, if I can't make it in the home, if I can't make it in the community, what am I to do?
Now, you're saying that they don't have coping mechanisms, they don't know how to cope with certain things. But aren't those ways in which they, in a sense, cope with or avoid what is actually happening to them?
And you are quite right. Coping can happen both positively or negatively. And while we as the adults might develop positive coping mechanism, and to be real, we have some horrible coping mechanism. We know that. We know that.
Yeah.
Right? So that's for another show. But our children cope by what they know. And they're not limited in terms of the whole cognitive and psychological coping. That is something we have to teach them. So they will cope with what they know. And if what they know is smoke, drink, sex, that is what is going to happen. It's not what we see in our schools every day. So then the question is, why are we surprised? Why are we thinking that the society will be this way and our children in our school will be a different way? Our children are not safe in their space, in their minds, but yet we require from them a level of productivity. It don't happen like that. We have to make a conscientious effort to help our children. We keep behaving as if the children is doing us a favor or we doing the children a favor by being here. I don't have to be here. We don't understand that the very essence of what we do is a requirement. It is just human that we take care of our children. And I made the point last show and I'm making it again. Our children are vulnerable and requires a level of guidance. And if we are not providing that, you see, let us look then and now. The divide is getting wider and wider because teachers are frustrated, and they are because of the demands that are being placed on them. Because of the level of frustration, we don't have anything happening after school. The bell calls in the evening, so everybody pick up the bag and they leave. No one is there to help the children extra, and if you have to go extra, you have to pay. Now, there are some teachers who give up their time, and God be with them, and I thank them for that. But the majority have to pay to go to lessons. Now, when you look at the economical status of children in school, how many of them can pay? And if you know these kind of lessons, it's first of all, the waiting list is long to get up, good lessons and or the finances. So what happens? That child is continuously pushed behind. So no matter how, I want to give you a real example at a school I went to. I was asked to do an intervention in school. I was hurt because it was only bad children they brought for me to talk with. I spent half of the time trying to calm them. And that is okay. The baddest boy in the class at the time who gave me hell, he gave me thunder, When the program ended, he was lurking by the window.
They always do, huh?
He came in and he sat with me, and I went into a full session with that child. He said, "Here, a big man. I really are good at this reading and writing thing, and they keep forcing me to do that." I said, "So what's going on?" He said that he's waiting till he gets the Form 4 so he can do a trade, because I real good at the trading, a big man. So they call him a troublemaker because he's not going to class, because he said when he goes to class he's embarrassed because they keep calling on him, they keep picking on him, and they think he's a bad boy. Simple. So I said, if I were to arrange for you to somebody to come and tutor you, you know, with the basics in the library, would you? He said, yeah. I can't handle that class thing. How many of our children today are in that position? How many of our children are being forced into a box where they must perform, and if they don't perform, society tells them that they are retarded, they're dotish, they're this, they're that? So what they do, they avoid it. And if they can't avoid it without making trouble, that means they become, you know, they pull to themselves and they sit in the corner. The teacher is happy because that child is not a troublemaker, but that child is screaming for help. And or you come out there and you start to behave because you don't want to be picked on, like that young man. So rather than be picked on in a class, he walks the halls. You see, and now he's branded as one of the school's top troublemaker. But the boy is not bad. The boy requires attention in a different way. Our education system, Ria, has to be overhauled. We cannot help our children. We cannot. Every year the Minister of Education will come after FCA and speaks about how poorly and the numbers, and every year after the CSEC he will come and talk about less than 50% getting a full certificate. Now, Ria, if you tie that into his statistics that less than 1% are really troublemakers, then why are so many of our children falling or have fallen behind? We are not looking at this thing from a holistic point of view. And unfortunately, that is where the beginning stages of criminality begins. Because if I'm left to my own devices with people in my surrounding who are so inclined, what else will happen?
Now, that story that you told, I have heard similar stories in my time teaching where students have come and said that, and they're just waiting for Form 4 to basically do the trade because there's nothing else that they feel that they're capable of doing. Remedial classes, very few and far between in schools, difficult to have. What the education system in Trinidad and Tobago is focused on academia.
Correct.
That is all it's focused on, academia, and you have to succeed, otherwise you're a failure.
It makes everything else a bad word. Don't tell a parent about trade, you know.
Oh, yes.
My child is doing not trade. Don't tell a parent about trade. Yet, when you call a plumber to your place, you have to pay a pound and a crown. When you go to a mechanic, when you call a woodwork person, I mean, we need to understand, we need to move away from this level of academia. Now, nothing wrong with people who are so inclined, but we must create a system that can cater for all. We must create a system where a child don't feel that they must be pressured into doing math, English. I tell people you could learn math and English from a technical point. You could learn math and English from a mechanical point. You can learn math and English from doing plumbing and woodworking. But we make these places, look at how we have deteriorated Serval in terms of public opinion. Serval is a place that is doing wonderful things. White Tech, we make these places seem as if you have to be less than a person to attend there. But we don't understand the value that these places have. Not everyone can get maths, English, physics, and chem, and for those of you who can, go forward because we need you. But we also need the other people in our society. And as soon as we start creating hubs in our schools where children who are dealing with mental illnesses and all these other stuff can be treated fairly, let me put it that way, because it is grossly unfair to have all of us sitting at the table writing the same exam with the same time with so many different challenges. And I always have to go back to my experience in the United States. And a lot of people say, oh, well, like the United States. And I'm saying, there are some great things there that can be modeled here. I mean, when I work in the school system, You're talking about 3 social workers, 3 psychologists, and also a community-based organization like myself who were part of the school system. We had weekly, monthly assessment of students. Teachers were trained to see, and you can imagine the beauty of a teacher coming to you and say, hey, Mr. B, this student wasn't here for 3 days and I find that they were withdrawn. Could you check them out and see what's going on? That is a beautiful thing.
Yes, but you see that system is different in the sense that if you see a child missing school or various things happening to a child, they're obligated to report it. So what happens here?
And that is a challenge.
Exactly.
And that is why I'm talking about the archaic. Listen, archaic is not, it just not working. We need to look at the holistic educational system. We need to have a system where all our students are catered for, right? And until we do that, we will forever be in the challenges that we have.
There's more to come here on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. We are still talking, I don't want to call them criminals, but unfortunately, and breeding criminals, it's a bit harsh, but we can understand where Mr. Dolly is coming from. We will be continuing this conversation here on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago with Mr. Hanif Benjamin. We are continuing talking about breeding criminals in schools, what it is we do with children when they are in the school system, what it is we don't do with children in the school system. And Hanif Benjamin is once again here with me in the second segment of this from the Center of Human Development for Human Development to discuss this. And we were basically talking about the whole education system, how academia driven it is. Children, you know, we need to recognize when children need help, when there are certain disabilities. You were talking about learning disabilities. Someone actually said that many people, many educators are not sometimes able to recognize learning disabilities as well.
Correct. And sometimes, for example, a parent came to my office. This young man is what, 16 years? And because she came to the office because he was a troublemaker by the school and they wanted to expel him. And haven't gotten to my office only to recognize that this child is living with serious emotional disturbances, ADHD, on the autism spectrum. And I'm saying, why are we now at the age 16 fighting to get out of Form 3, by the way, right? And based on my assessment, only got to Form 3 because people just moved him along. Why are we at that age now assessing him for these things? That to me is criminal. And so it speaks to our system and whether our system is designed to pick up when our children are having difficulties. You see, again, it goes back to understanding child and adolescent development. Even as a parent, you need to understand between the ages of X and Y, this should happen. And if it's not happening, then something needs to be done. But again, Mr. Dolly in his article spoke about our inability to tell parents difficult news, and or I am saying parents' ability to accept the news, because I've worked with parents who stop coming to treatment because they cannot accept the fact that their child or children might be living with some form of disability, whether it is educational and or they are on the autism spectrum and or dealing with some form of mental illness.
But he also said that, you know, parents only want to talk or only want to hear positive things about their children. They don't want to hear the negative things about their children. They don't want to face those things. But in your instance where, and I know parents would stop coming, but is it that they don't want to accept it, or is it that they think, oh, I cannot afford to get the help that my child needs, so I'm just going to try to see how far they can get through the education system as it is?
I'm not sure if we have a challenge with people affording treatment in a system that provides free treatment. That is the unfortunate thing, because I can't, every time I have an opportunity, I speak about our student support services and how under-resourced, under-managed. It is everything that should not be. That should be a powerhouse in our school system. But we have children, when they are referred, when they are indeed referred, it takes a year, sometimes 2 years before they are seen. And if they are seen, to get a follow-up. Like I had a child who was on a medication for over 9 months without a follow-up. Why would you put a child on a psychotropic medication and not have a follow-up within 30 days, 45 days? You're talking about 6 months on this one medication. So the parent took him off the medication because of side effects that the parents herself did not understand. You see, so the challenge, Ria, is even if they recognize, what happens then? And that is the same thing that we're seeing here. I don't think it's because a parent can't afford. That is in the minority. But the question is whether they accept that something is indeed wrong. When they accept that something, because a lot of times they put it on themselves and they make it feel as if something is wrong with me. And if I acknowledge that something is wrong with my child or children, that is then a reflection on me as a parent.
What about social workers in schools as well? That's a
Listen
limited
here
liability. That's, yes.
Listen here. Social workers are a scarce commodity.
Yeah.
We have social workers, one social worker for 4 schools. So when you look up the number of students under their purview, you're talking about 1,000. That is madness. It's a waste of money. It is a waste of time. It frustrates the social worker. You know how many social workers reach out to me and say, Hanif, I want to do good work. They feel trapped because when they see a child this week, chances are they're not going to see that child for another 4 weeks. And they know for a fact that that child requires weekly or bi-weekly or intervention. We have social workers still working month-to-month contract. We have social workers who have not been paid. And I'm talking about social workers with masters and PhDs and all of these things, where the banks are laughing at them. How can we expect our social workers to go out there and do what they need to do under such circumstances? Every school should have 2 social workers permanently and a psychologist permanently. Every school. And it is not because there is a lack of social workers. I am a lecturer, so I know every year UE, COSTAT, USC, Nazarene graduate social workers. I can tell you that. So we're not lacking social workers. We need to recognize the power that social worker can invest in a school. Social workers can go beyond the borders of the school. A teacher would not have the time to go to a home visit. A teacher would not have the time to engage a parent as long as that parent would need engaging. But a social worker, on the other hand, can go to a house. A social worker can engage a parent beyond. And if we work in a multidisciplinary approach where the social worker, the psychologist, the teacher, the dean, and also the experts outside of the school system, like my company, like the Dollies, like the other people, can in fact create the turnaround that we look at. And that is why I keep saying that we are operating in an archaic society. We must recognize that we are woefully lacking in terms of the support. And I can tell the minister and all the ministers, past and to come, the results will not change unless we look at the well-being of our children. Simple. Ray, you always get me so...
Yeah, well, you've actually left me speechless, Hanif, simply because, you know, this is like spinning top in mud. We see issues with our children. We see issues that need to be dealt with our children. I've been in the system. I've seen it. You are in the system. Parents can recognize. Teachers in the system now are seeing issues. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse.
It's getting worse, and I can very well understand why Mr. Dolly made the statements that he made. And it is true, it has been true, it will continue to hold true unless we sit on the table together, NPTA, everybody, all the stakeholders, and come up with a new and dynamic way of being student ready and student focused.
Yeah, definitely.
Until we do that, we're going to continue to see the problems we're having.
We will. Thank you once again, Hanif. You have just left me. It's always a draining issue at talking about these topics, but they're topics we need to be talking about. It's the future of our nation, so we need to be talking about this. Thank you once again, Hanif.
Always a pleasure.